In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a super simple sourdough starter. By following these simple, easy steps, you can have your own sourdough starter bubbling away on your countertop in just 7 to 10 days with just 1 or 2 5-minute mixes each day. I'll break down all the steps, whether you're just starting out or if you've made sourdough starter in the past. I'll show you the basic tools I use to make my own process go smoothly. And I'll also give you 3 tips to save you time and streamline your own process. To begin your sourdough creation adventure, you'll want to have a jar just big enough to hold the starter when it rises to its maximum height after each feeding. I use these very popular 3/4 liter wet jars. They have a wide mouth at the top for easy access and no tight corners for cleaning. And so tip number 1. When you refresh your starter, use a second clean jar to mix the necessary discard from the last feeding, plus the flour and water. That way you'll always have a clean jar on hand for the next feeding. You'll also want to have a small digital kitchen scale to measure your ingredients in grams, a small silicone or rubber spatula for mixing your flour and water, and an instant read kitchen thermometer for checking water temperature. Later on, you'll use your instant read thermometer for checking dough temperature when you're ready to mix dough for baking. Tip number 2. If you can, keep your starter at least 75 degrees Fahrenheit. It will become more active sooner and stay more active going forward. Find a warm spot in your kitchen, sometimes on top of the refrigerator or another appliance that might stay warm most of the day, or even inside your turned off oven with the light turned on if your oven has that feature. Don't get discouraged if you see a lapse in activity on days 3 and 4. This is completely normal. Just keep with the process of discarding some of the old and carrying some of that starter mixture over, adding fresh flour and water each day and letting it sit until the next refreshment time. Don't skip using whole rye flour, as the added minerals and nutrients help kickstart the process. If you don't have access to whole rye flour, a high-quality whole wheat flour will work well in its place. And tip number 3, you'll want to use filtered water when mixing and refreshing your starter rather than tap water to be sure you're not adding chlorine and other common tap water minerals into your mix. I love my Brita water filter and always have it handy on my kitchen counter. So on day 1, let's begin the process of creating your very own brand new sourdough starter. Turn on your kitchen scale and place a clean empty jar on top. Zero out the scale. Add 100 grams of rye flour and 125 grams of warm water at about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and then stir with your spatula to mix well. Cover and store in a warm place for 24 hours. I like to lay the glass lid on top of the jars without the rubber seal so that no air gets in, but gases inside can escape as they need as the fermentation process begins. If your jar has a threaded lid, it's okay to screw it on loosely, but again allow some gases to escape because this mixture will expand each day. On day 2, you might see a burst of fermentation activity and also notice it may have an off aroma. This activity is usually not the result of the mature symbiosis of natural bacteria and yeast we're looking for at this early stage. Whether you see this burst of activity or not, at this point your starter is not yet ready to bake with. This initial surge will typically disappear by day 3 or 4. Stick to the schedule and it will come back, but more stable. Trust the process. The flour and water you add to your mixture each day is the starter's food, and what is left over at the next feeding is the discard once all the nutrients are used up. Sometimes I hear people say it's like having a pet in the house that needs to be fed, but don't worry, you never have to take it for a walk. So here we are at the day 2 steps. Place your clean, empty second jar on your kitchen scale and zero out the scale. Spoon 75 grams of yesterday's mixture into this new clean jar and discard what's left over. As a side note, once you have a mature starter maintained, there are many recipes available for baking with sourdough discard. Next, add 50 grams of rye flour, 50 grams of white flour, and 115 grams of warm water, and mix well. Cover and store the mixture in the same warm spot as yesterday for the next 24 hours. That brings us up to day 3. In the morning, you may start to see more activity, or you may see none. Regardless, don't worry, stick to the schedule. Remember, if it's cooler in your kitchen, perhaps in the wintertime, then warm your mixing water to at least 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Place your clean, empty second jar on your kitchen scale and zero out the scale. Spoon 75 grams of yesterday's mixture into the new clean jar and discard what is left over. Add 50 grams of rye flour, 50 grams of white flour, and 115 grams of warm water and mix well. Then again, we're going to cover and store the mixture in the same warm spot for the next 24 hours. And this brings us up to day 4. In the morning, you should start to see more signs of fermentation activity if you haven't already. There will be bubbles scattered on the sides and top, and the level of the mixture may have risen and fallen a little, as evidenced by streaks on the side of the jar. With day 4, you'll now start refreshing your mixture twice a day for the rest of the creation process. Refresh the mixture in the same way as you did on day 3 with 75 grams of yesterday's mixture into your clean jar. Add 50 grams of rye flour, 50 grams of white flour, and 115 grams of warm water and mix well. Again, we cover and store the mixture in the same warm spot, but this time for 12 hours instead of 24. After this 12-hour rest period, refresh your mixture into your second clean jar once again and let the new mixture rest overnight. Coming up now on days 5 and 6, the instructions will be the same for each day. For days 5 and 6, repeat the steps from day 4 twice a day as the fermentation activity increases more and more. And now at day 7 and onward, in the morning of day 7, once again place your clean, empty second jar on your kitchen scale and zero out the scale. But this time, spoon just 20 grams of yesterday's mixture into the clean jar. Add 30 grams of rye flour, 70 grams of white flour, and 100 grams of warm water at around 80 to 85 degrees. Mix well, cover, and let rest for 12 to 24 hours. For the best, most consistent, and highest quality starter going forward, you can refresh it every 12 hours. I personally tend to only refresh my starter every 24 hours, but I don't bake as often as many people will. The longer the time between refreshing the starter, the higher the sour acidity level will rise, and if you wait too long before the next feeding, the starter could lose its potency, and the creation process might need to be started over again at day 1. As long as you can see the starter growing and expanding within the 12 hours of feeding, it should be fine to continue this maintenance cycle. As I said at the beginning, consistency is the key. Congratulations, you should have a sourdough starter that is ready to use for baking. At this point, you should see consistent signs of fermentation or ripeness every day. This consistency indicates that you have a stable balance of beneficial bacteria and yeasts in your starter, and it is strong enough to be used for your first bake. Between refreshments, look for these signs of ripeness. There are bubbles on the surface and at the sides. The consistency has loosened since the first mixing, and it will be rather easy to stir. It has a pleasantly sour aroma, but not excessively pungent. If you choose to only refresh your starter once a day instead of twice a day, then the alcohol byproducts of fermentation will be higher and the smell will become sharper than it would be when refreshing every 12 hours. You will notice it has risen to some degree, typically about 30% or more each day. My now mature starter tends to even double in size overnight. If your starter is still struggling to show signs of consistent and predictable fermentation activity, keep refreshing it with the same ratio of ingredients for another day or several more days until things pick up. This process can sometimes take longer depending on the flour you use and the environment, especially if it's cool in your kitchen. Be patient and stick to the schedule. Now that you are ready, follow the link above for my video on how to create basic country bread. If you found this video to be helpful, please click the like and share your experience in the comments below. Thank you and happy baking.